Who is the most heinous and iconic villain in the history of cinema? When faced with this question, most people will have a ready answer with some very familiar names following. Is it perhaps Voldemort? An evil wizard with a legion of dark followers that kill Harry Potter's parents along with several other innocent people is definitely a good candidate. Or maybe Darth Vader, running the tyrannical galactic empire that enslaves the galaxy while showing no mercy for his enemies and even for his subordinates, sure takes him close to the top. What about Hannibal Lecter? With an emblematic persona almost as grand as his brutal crimes, the famous sadistic cannibal serial killer is bound to get at least in the top 3 for sure. However, there's a character that has never been featured in any movie villain rankings and which stands at least alongside those names and others like Agent Smith, Dracula, Hans Gruber, Freddy Krueger, the Joker, Kylo Ren, Michael Myers, Alex the Large or Hans Landa. His name is El Jaibo. So who's El Jaibo? By his name it's easy to guess that he's Hispanic. In fact, he's a Mexican character that is featured in Luís Buñuel's 1950 masterpiece, Los Olvidados, also known as The Young and the Damned. But how does one teenage street kid from Mexico City from 70 years ago fare against all the other quintessential bad guys in cinema history? What makes him all that intimidating and worthy to being compared with them? In Los Olvidados, El Jaibo makes an appearance shortly after the movie begins, as a teenage leader of a street gang comprised of young kids in an impoverished slum on the outskirts of Mexico City that reunites and leads them again after breaking out of a juvenile jail. Throughout the film, there are plentiful examples of his wild and cruel behavior, being a young man hardened by the life on the streets and behind bars, which showcases in numerous occasions a deep-rooted malicious disposition. He is the outcome and the embodiment of a dog-eat-dog world, acting particularly savagely towards the people of his condition and class, the poor and downtrodden, and especially towards those below him, robbing and beating both a blind musician and a crippled beggar with no legs, whether for money or cigarettes, while additionally getting rid of their source of income and survival, the musical instruments of the former and the moving board of the latter. The fact that he not only strips them of their meager possessions, but also feels the need to go a step further and destroy their essential life support, allows one to identify a particularly callous kind of antagonist with total disregard for all life but his own. He is also seen getting frisky and attempting to coerce one of his gang members' little sister into embracing against her will, initially tricking her with the promise of money, revealing in full splendor his shrewd and manipulative character. More serious is the outcome of one of his first actions upon returning to the streets, as he tracks down the alleged snitch that is responsible for landing him in jail, a youth called Julian. After attracting him to a secluded area and confronting him, he attacks him from behind and unleashes such a ferocious beating with a wood stick that ends up leaving the youngster dead. In a chilling final stroke of utter disregard for Julian, El Jaibo is seen detachedly emptying the young man's pockets before hurriedly leaving the crime scene. The younger kid that took El Jaibo to Julian and witnessed the crime, Pedro, who can be said to be the film's protagonist, is the next in line to be affected by El Jaibo's feral spirit. First, he is ordered to keep his mouth shut and threatened by him after news starts circulating concerning the finding of Julian's body, which together with the guilt of having been responsible to a degree for the crime, scarred him to the point of suffering nightmares, an example of which is brilliantly explored by the director Luís Buñuel, an artist widely known to have been associated with surrealism, the art movement that delved in oniric dream imagery and which inspired many novels, poetry, painting and films, with Buñuel being famous in the filmmaking industry for his unique treatment and representation of dreams, a trait that was lauded by none other than Andrei Tarkovsky, a master of cinematic dreams on his own. In Los Olvidados, soon after the murder, Pedro attempts to find a job so that he can help his mother and family by earning an income, but a visit from El Jaibo to his workplace gets him fired subsequently after his boss placed the blame on Pedro for a disappearing item, a knife that was actually stolen by El Jaibo while Pedro wasn't looking. Pedro then disappears and lays low for a while, but during that time El Jaibo visits his home, seeking to find him, but the spectator becomes a witness of his lust toward Pedro's mother, one which is soon after shockingly consummated. After Pedro is found and sent to a correctional farm where he finds tranquility and happiness again, away from the streets although only after a painful cathartic process, Pedro is given by the director a considerable sum of money to go on an errand outside the farm, as a token of trust for his reformed character, but he's intercepted once again by El Jaibo, who forcibly shifts the ownership of the money sum entrusted to him and swiftly departs. When confronting El Jaibo on a later occasion, they both get into a savage fight in which Pedro gets severely beaten, since El Jaibo is older, taller and stronger. After revealing El Jaibo's responsibility for the murder of Julian to the crowd that gather around them in the meantime, El Jaibo threatens to kill him just before he barely escapes the raging mob. Ultimately, El Jaibo and Pedro find each other again accidentally one night in an acquaintance's barn, which culminates with Pedro's tragic killing. By the time El Jaibo is intercepted by the police, he is shot dead after a short pursuit, and the spectator is left with a somewhat bittersweet feeling instead of the supposed or expected relief. Although the utter infamy of his actions, the iniquity and wrongdoing that he's brought to the world is undeniable, El Jaibo's demise brings forth a striking picture just as he exhales for the last few times, that of a lone, stray dog wandering in the streets. The parallel is remarkable, for not only is their environment an exemplary depiction of a dog-eat-dog world as mentioned earlier on the essay, but also much like an abandoned dog which, condemned to be shunned by all, thrives in a wild and ruthless environment that turns him rabid and unsocialized, so does humanity degenerate and become depraved and misanthropic, its core corrupted by the foulness of its habitat. This is where it perhaps lies what distinguishes El Jaibo and Los Olvidados from the villains mentioned at the beginning of the video and the movies in which they shine, for in here, the audience observes a balanced, subtle and conscious depiction of how monsters may arise, not just out of pure, unadulterated evil, an abstract concept with strong theological roots but seldom useful in the branch of sociology, or from psychiatric afflictions, but one in fact sees how very often there's a causality underlying tangible vicious circumstances that shape the character and nature of the individuals locked amidst its dehumanizing swirl. It is Buñuel's sense of humanism then that infiltrates the film and showcases a facet that is commonly abolished by conventional filmmaking that seeks to provide black and white characters that are easy to root for and antagonize, in a facile attempt to guarantee the spectator's emotional investment and satisfaction despite its cursory and short-lived character. By adding some additional shades of grey within its darkened urban purgatory, Los Olvidados acts as a touching inquiry into the roots of civic violence and social malaise amidst the lower classes, without exculpating or infantilizing its subjects, a proof of Buñuel's keen understanding of humanity. Now, in regards to El Jaibo's villain status in comparison to other acclaimed characters, to recapitulate, El Jaibo is a juvenile delinquent with a violent temperament, incapable of practicing the good or justice, that effectively relishes in his bad deeds, is prone to brutality, is unrestrainedly wicked and vile towards most members of society, but especially towards the hapless, regardless of being young or old, while also being lustful in regards to the innocent and naive, which all things considered makes for a particularly shocking character. On another note, in how many films can one say that the villain manages to be so menacing and persistently threatening to the protagonist, a former friend, to the point of making him lose his job, steal his money, beat him down to a pulp, have intercourse with his mother, and finally killing him? Admittedly, El Jaibo may not have murdered as many people as some of the more infamous movie villains, and his hellish behavior may have negatively impacted only a handful of people. But the fact that he managed to get his way in all circumstances through the use of force, without setbacks and with particular inhumanity, especially towards children and young adults, sends him straight up to the Hall of Fame of movie villains. And yet, unlike conventional entertainment productions, El Jaibo is not merely a fictional character devised as a challenger or obstacle to overcome for a hero in a quest for justice or good, but is in fact a result of Buñuel's comprehensive grasp of humanity, one which ultimately infuses the character with more than one layer of meaning and interpretation, even if not clear-cut as other notorious examples of anti-heroes. If this foray into El Jaibo's significance within Los Olvidados aroused your interest, make sure to go ahead and watch the whole film, as it is one of Buñuel's finest works and a Mexican masterpiece of social cinema, with the extra of having Gabriel Figueroa as director of photography, one of the greatest cinematographers in the history of cinema. Also have a look at other videos on this channel if you're interested in film from all around the world and from all decades. Thank you for listening and see you next time.